Welcome to the channel. Here we dive deep into powerful books and break down their ideas in a calm, thoughtful way. In today's episode, we explore How to Read a Book by Mortimer J. Adler and Charles Van Doren, a practical guide to reading smarter, understanding deeper, and getting more value from every book you pick up. If you enjoy clear, thought-provoking breakdowns like this, make sure to subscribe and stay with us for more.
Think about the last really dense, difficult book you read.
Oh, yeah. We've all got one sitting on the nightstand.
Right. Maybe it was like a nonfiction bestseller or a massive biography or some classic you just felt completely obligated to tackle.
The ones you read just so you can say you read them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you get to the last page, you close the cover, and you probably feel this massive rush of accomplishment.
Sure, you check the box.
But, and here's the scary part. If someone sat you down right then and there and asked you to explain the author's core argument in your own words, could you?
Probably not. Most people couldn't.
Right. Or would you just, parrot their exact phrases back to them? Because today we are facing this terrifying reality. We are absolutely drowning in an ocean of text.
I mean, we're scrolling through millions of words a year.
Millions. But we've completely forgotten how to actually read.
Yeah, it really is the defining cognitive illusion of our era. We totally mistake the frictionless consumption of data for actual learning.
Frictionless consumption. I like that.
Well, think about modern media, right? Television, audio feeds, endless internet scrolling, they are practically designed to make thinking seem unnecessary.
Yeah, they do the work for you.
Exactly. The packaging of intellectual positions is done so perfectly by some of the best minds of our day that it acts like Adler calls it a cassette tape.
Oh man, I see exactly what you mean by that. You just scroll until you find a beautifully packaged take on a really complex issue.
Right.
And instead of actually wrestling with the facts yourself, you just adopt it.
You just slot it right in.
Yeah. You insert the opinion into your head, and whenever the topic comes up at, say, a dinner party, you just hit play.
Hit play and recite.
You sound so informed without ever having done the cognitive labor.
Precisely. The viewer or the reader is presented with this perfectly bundled complex of rhetoric and selected data. It makes it incredibly easy to, make up your own mind with zero actual effort.
Which is an oxymoron, right?
Completely. You aren't making up your mind, you are renting someone else's.
Wow. Renting someone else's mind, that is a gut punch. Which brings us to the mission of today's deep dive. We are exploring the 1972 revised edition of Mortimer J. Adler and Charles Van Doren's absolute classic, How to Read a Book.
An essential text.
And let me be clear right out of the gate for you listening.
Right.
This deep dive isn't about, speed reading hacks.
No, definitely not.
It's not about how to crush a business book in 20 minutes so you can feel super productive. We are exploring the antidote to that cassette tape mindset.
We're talking about transforming reading from a passive chore into an intensely active, mind-expanding art.
Right. But to do that, we first have to fundamentally redefine what reading actually is. We have to completely shatter this myth of passive reading.
Yeah, because the standard assumption is that writing and speaking are the active undertakings, right?
Mm.
While reading and listening are entirely passive.
People just imagine the reader as a sort of empty receptacle just waiting to receive a communication.
Exactly, like you're just a bucket being filled with water.
Or like being a passenger in a car. You just sit there, maybe look out the window, and trust the driver to get you to the destination.
But reading a challenging book should actually be like driving a manual transmission in heavy traffic.
Oh, I love that.
You have to be hyper aware of the engine, right? Constantly shifting gears depending on the terrain, anticipating the road ahead. You are working just as hard as the machine.
That perfectly captures Adler's point. He uses a baseball analogy to make a really similar case.
Right, the pitcher and the catcher.
Yeah. People tend to think the writer is the active pitcher, throwing the ball, and the reader is just the passive catcher's mitt waiting to be struck by it.
But if you look at the physical reality of catching a baseball, that's completely wrong.
How so?
Well, the pitcher initiates the motion, sure, but the catcher terminates it. The catcher is actively moving, positioning themselves, anticipating, and strategizing to catch what the pitcher is throwing.
They're bracing for impact, reading the spin.
Exactly. If anything in that scenario is passive, it's the ball itself.
The ball is just the text.
Right. The text is just this inert object flying through the air.
That is so good. So the art of catching is the skill of catching every kind of pitch. Fastballs, curveballs, knuckleballs.
And the more effort you exert, the better the catch.
But, okay, if reading is this highly active sport, what are we actually trying to win? Adler breaks down two main goals, right? Reading for information and reading for understanding.
Yes, and the line between those two seems pretty blurry at first glance.
It really does. So how do we distinguish them?
The distinction relies on the concept of equality between the writer and the reader.
Okay, equality, meaning what exactly?
Imagine you pick up a book, right?
Yeah.
And from start to finish, you effortlessly grasp absolutely everything the author has to say.
Like it's just a breeze to read.
Right. In that scenario, your mind and the author's mind are already equals. You were perfectly matched before you even started chapter 1.
So I didn't actually learn anything structurally new about how the world works then. I just collected more data.
Exactly. You gained information, new facts to store in your memory, but you could not have increased your understanding.
Because my mind didn't have to stretch.
Right. Enlightenment is only achieved when, in addition to knowing what an author says, you know what they mean and why they say it.
Okay.
So reading for understanding only happens when there is an initial inequality.
And inequality. The author has to be smarter than me.
Well, the writer must be superior to the reader in their grasp of that specific subject, yes. And the reader must be able to overcome that inequality by elevating their own mind to the author's level.
Elevating your mind. But wait, how is reading a book different from, say, sitting in a classroom and having a professor explain something to me? Both require elevating my mind, right?
They do, but the difference lies in the mechanism of learning. Adler distinguishes between instruction and discovery.
Instruction versus discovery. Okay, break that down.
Instruction is when you learn from a teacher who is present. If you are puzzled by a concept, what do? You raise your hand and ask the teacher to clarify.
Right. Professor, I don't get this.
Exactly. But learning by discovery, unaided discovery, is learning by research, investigation, and reflection without a teacher. You are out in the field studying nature or phenomena directly.
But a book isn't nature. The author deliberately wrote it to guide me.
Correct, which is why Adler calls reading aided discovery.
Aided discovery.
You are being taught by an absent teacher.
Yep.
The guidance is there in the text, but the interaction is profoundly one-sided.
Right, because if you ask a book a question, it won't talk back.
Exactly. You have to answer it yourself using only the clues left behind.
So reading for understanding is effectively like a form of forensic science. You are investigating the author's mind.
That's a great way to put it.
No wonder it feels so exhausting to tackle a dense piece of literature. You are pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps using nothing but black ink on white paper.
It requires all the exact same skills as original scientific research.
Wow, really?
Absolutely. You need keen observation to spot the crucial words, a really solid memory to hold the arguments together, imagination to follow the logic, and an intellect trained in analysis.
You are doing the heavy lifting that a live teacher would normally do for you.
Exactly.
That completely shifts how I view a difficult book. It's not a failure on my part if I find it hard. It's like a mental gymnasium.
It's supposed to be hard.
And to navigate that gymnasium, Adler says we have to realize that reading isn't just one monolithic skill. We don't just read. We engage in a hierarchy of reading.
Yes. There are 4 cumulative levels.
And that word cumulative is essential, right?
Totally. You cannot master the higher levels without internalizing the lower ones. The higher levels contain all the skills of the preceding ones.
Okay, so let's build the foundation. Level 1, elementary reading. This is basically the mechanics of literacy we learn in grade school.
Right. The only goal here is to answer the question, what does the sentence say?
It sounds super basic, but historically the pedagogy around this level has been intensely debated, hasn't it?
Oh, fiercely. Adler details how in the 19th century, the ABC method was dominant.
The ABC method. So spelling it out.
Yeah, it was highly synthetic. Children sounded out individual letters and syllables, stringing them together to form words.
Phonics, basically.
Essentially, yes.
Okay.
But then figures like Horace Mann advocated for the sight method or the whole word approach.
Okay, how is that different?
It was analytic instead of synthetic. Children were taught to recognize whole words visually before they ever looked at the individual letter.
Oh, right, like memorizing the shape of the word cat rather than sounding out C-A-T.
Precisely. And that phonics versus whole word debate, it is still raging in education today.
It really is. It fundamentally alters how a child's brain processes a page of text.
It does. And Adler outlines 4 distinct stages just within this elementary level.
4 stages just for elementary reading.
Yeah. It starts with reading readiness from birth to age 6 or 7. That involves physical vision, basic hearing, and the cognitive capacity to hold a sentence in mind.
Okay, stage 1.
Stage 2 is word mastery. learning a few hundred sight words and basic phonics.
Making sense of the symbols.
Right. Then stage 3 involves rapid vocabulary growth, usually through context clues, where a child learns to read for different purposes.
Like reading a menu versus reading a storybook.
Exactly. And then comes the 4th stage, the mature stage of elementary reading, which is usually achieved around the 8th or 9th grade.
So early high school.
Right. At this point, the student can assimilate their reading, compare views, and extract basic themes.
But, and the source material hits us with a pretty bleak statistic here, most high schoolers, and even a staggering number of college students, never move beyond this level.
It's true. They graduate functionally stuck at 9th grade literacy.
That is wild. They know what the sentence says, but they never learn the systematic tools to dig into what it means.
Which is precisely why adults feel completely overwhelmed when they pick up a work of serious philosophy, history, or science.
They are trying to use a 9th grade toolkit on an advanced cognitive problem.
Exactly. You wouldn't use a plastic hammer to build a skyscraper.
Yeah. Which brings us to level 2, inspectional reading. And this is presented as the structural antidote to information overload.
Yes. Inspectional reading is completely governed by time.
Time is the main factor.
Right. The goal isn't absolute comprehension. The goal is to extract the maximum amount of value from a book in a strictly limited amount of time.
And Adler breaks this into 2 subtypes. Subtype 1 is systematic skimming.
Think of systematic skimming as an X-ray.
An X-ray.
You aren't actually reading the book. You are examining its skeletal structure to see if it even deserves your time.
Because we've all bought books that we abandon after 20 pages?
Well, countless times. But systematic skimming prevents that. Adler gives a literal checklist for it.
Okay, let's hear the checklist. What's step 1?
First, look at the title page and the preface. These are the author's signal flags. They tell you the angle and the scope.
The signal flags. Got it.
Second, study the table of contents. Treat it like a roadmap.
People always skip the table of contents.
I know, but it's crucial. Third, check the index. Look for crucial terms and the range of topics. If certain terms have dozens of citations, you know what the author actually cares about.
Oh, that's a great hack. Look at what gets referenced the most.
Exactly. And fourth, dip in. Read the summary paragraphs in chapters that seem pivotal.
So by spending just, 15 or 20 minutes doing this, you know exactly what kind of book you're holding.
Yep. You know its general theme, its structure, and whether it warrants a deeper investment of your actual life.
Right. But let's say the book passes the test. It's important, it's relevant, and you want to tackle it. Adler says you move to subtype 2 of inspectional reading, which is superficial reading.
Yes.
Now, superficial usually means shallow or careless. What does he mean tactically here?
This is a rule that almost everyone violates, and it causes immense frustration.
Okay, lay it on me.
Adler's rule for tackling a difficult book for the first time is this. Read it straight through without ever stopping to look up or ponder the things you do not understand right away.
Wait, hold on. That completely contradicts how we're taught to read in school.
I know it does.
If I encounter a crucial concept or a vocabulary word I don't know in chapter 1 and I don't look it up, I might fundamentally misunderstand chapters 2 through 10.
That's the fear, yes.
It feels like building a house on sand. How does Adler justify blindly pushing forward when you're effectively lost?
He justifies it because the alternative is worse. If you stop at every single obstacle, you ruin the big picture. You get so bogged down in the minutia that you lose the forest for the trees.
Okay, I can see that. You lose momentum.
Right. Adler uses a brilliant example regarding Shakespeare. Think about how high school students are forced to read Hamlet or Julius Caesar.
Oh, painfully. Scene by scene.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Scene by scene, constantly stopping to look up archaic words in the glossary or trying to decipher historical footnotes.
Right, spending 20 minutes on a single soliloquy just translating the Elizabethan English.
And as a result, they never actually read the play. By the time they reach the end of the tragedy, weeks later, they've completely forgotten the emotional momentum of the beginning.
They turn a cohesive piece of art into a vocabulary test.
Precisely. If instead they just read the play straight through, accepting that they won't understand every word.
They would still grasp the arc of the characters, the tension, the plot.
Exactly. That initial superficial read-through provides the scaffolding.
So even if I only comprehend, 50% of a tough philosophical treatise on the first pass, that 50% gives me the contextual map I need.
Yes.
And when I go back for a second deeper read, The parts I didn't understand will start making sense because I now know where the author is ultimately heading.
Exactly. Understanding half of a tough book in context is infinitely better than understanding nothing because you gave up on page 10 after hitting a really difficult paragraph.
That makes so much sense. Now, this naturally brings up a massive cultural trend that Adler addresses, which is speed reading.
Oh, yes. The speed reading craze.
There is a whole industry built around training your eyes to stop subvocalizing or trying to fix eye movements because supposedly our eyes regress and fixate too many times on a single line.
Right.
Does Adler advocate for these speed reading courses?
He completely dismantles the fallacy at the heart of the speed reading movement.
Really? How so?
The goal of reading is not universal, blazing speed. The goal is variable speed.
Variable speed.
He quotes Blaise Pascal, who said 300 years ago, "When we read too fast or too slowly, we understand nothing."
Okay, so variable speed gives you permission to treat different sentences differently. You're effectively shifting gears depending on the terrain of the text.
That's the perfect analogy.
You wouldn't drive a sports car at 100 miles an hour over a rocky mountain pass, and you shouldn't read dense philosophy at the same speed you read a beach thriller.
Precisely. Speed reading courses are essentially remedial.
Remedial.
Yeah, they fix physiological hangups at the elementary level, like reading word by word instead of taking in phrases. That's useful for reading the morning news.
Or skimming an email.
Right. But try applying a 500-word-a-minute pace to a foundational text like the Declaration of Independence.
Oh, wow. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. If you're skimming that at top speed, you blow right past the implications of self-evident, inalienable liberty, consent of the governed.
Those words are the foundation of a nation. They deserve to be pondered over for days, weeks, or even years.
You can't speed read the foundation of a nation.
Exactly. Reading them at 500 words a minute yields zero comprehension. You must read a book no more quickly than you can comprehend it and no more slowly than it deserves.
No more slowly than it deserves. I love that. Okay, so we've inspected the book, skimmed it, decided it's worth our time, and done a superficial read-through to get the lay of the land.
Scaffolding is up.
Right. How do we actually conquer it when we decide to dedicate unlimited time to it? This brings us to level 3, analytical reading.
Yes, analytical reading is the act of chewing and digesting a book. It is the best, most demanding reading you can possibly do.
The heavy lifting.
All right, Adler breaks this into 3 stages. Stage 1 is all about dissecting the skeleton of the book, finding its structural core. And there are 4 rules to achieve this.
Okay, let's go through the rules. Rule 1, classify the book. You have to know what kind of book you are reading before you begin.
It sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised.
Well, Adler shares an amazing anecdote about how badly people fail at this. In 1959, the English-speaking world was celebrating the centenary of Charles Darwin's famous book.
Right.
Adler asked 25 highly educated, well-read people what the exact title of the book was, and more than half of them confidently answered, "The Origin of the Species."
Which is a profound structural misunderstanding of Darwin's entire project.
Exactly. Darwin didn't write about the origin of the human species. The actual title is On the Origin of Species, plural.
Right, no, the.
It's about the proliferation and adaptation of all species across biological history. People couldn't even read the title page properly, which means they approached the book with completely warped expectations.
That simple, definite article completely changes the classification of the book. And classification dictates the rules of engagement.
So how do we classify?
You must ask, is the book theoretical, meaning it aims to expand your knowledge of what is? Or is it practical, meaning it aims to teach you how to do something?
Theoretical versus practical.
Right. And if it's theoretical, you have to break it down further. Is it science, which relies on special laboratory experiments or massive observational data? Or is it philosophy, which relies on the common daily experience of mankind?
Oh, that's an important distinction, because if you try to read a philosophical tract as if it were an empirical science paper, you'll be endlessly frustrated looking for data that was never meant to be there.
Exactly. You're playing by the wrong rules.
Okay, so once you've classified the book, you move to rule 2. State the unity of the whole book in a single sentence or a short paragraph.
What is the singular theme the author is trying to convey?
You have to boil it down, and once you have that unifying thread, you move to rule 3. Outline the parts in their order and relation.
This is where Adler uses the X-ray analogy.
Right. A book comes to you dressed in flesh and clothes. The author spent years putting that flesh on the bones, adding examples, transitions, and rhetoric just to make it readable.
To make it look nice.
But as an analytical reader, you must use X-ray eyes to pierce through the flesh and expose the skeleton underneath.
Thus you have to map it out.
You have to be able to say, the author accomplished their goal by dividing the book into 5 parts. Part 1 establishes this premise, Part 2 counters the opposing view, and so on.
Which leads directly into Rule 4. Define the author's problems.
What questions did the author start with?
Exactly. Were they theoretical questions like, does this thing exist? What caused it? What purpose does it serve?
Or were they practical questions? What ends should be sought? What means should be chosen to achieve that end? Now, I have to be honest here. Outlining the parts of a whole book, identifying every sub-argument, defining the author's exact problems, that sounds like a monumental task.
It is a lot of work.
If someone reads 20 books a year, doing this level of architectural mapping for every single one sounds exhausting, almost paralyzing.
It is an ideal to strive for, and it really speaks to the difficulty of acquiring a complex skill. Adler uses the analogy of learning to ski.
Skiing.
Yeah. When you first strap on skis, it is a humiliating experience.
Oh, tell me about it.
You are painfully aware of every separate awkward movement. You have to consciously think about bending your knees, shifting your weight from one edge to the other, planting your poles at the precise moment. You feel totally mechanical and clumsy.
I definitely spent my first day on a mountain mostly staring at the tips of my skis and falling over because I was overthinking the mechanics.
Right. But eventually, what happens?
It gets easier.
With practice, you forget the separate acts. They fuse into one fluid, harmonious motion. You no longer think about shifting your weight, you just glide.
The muscle memory takes over.
Exactly. Reading analytically works exactly the same way. You must rigorously practice these separate rules, classifying, stating the unity, outlining the skeleton, finding the problems, until they become an unconscious habit.
So it's painfully slow at first?
At first, yes. But eventually, you will X-ray books intuitively as you read them.
You have to embrace the awkwardness to get to the glide.
Yeah.
I like that. Okay, so we've X-rayed the book, we have the skeleton. Now we enter stage 2 of analytical reading, putting the flesh back on the bones.
Right.
How do we understand the actual meat of the author's argument? This is where we have to tunnel through the barrier of language.
That's a crucial metaphor. Language is an imperfect medium. It is an obstacle as much as it is a bridge.
How so?
Think of it like this. The author is trying to tunnel through a mountain from their side, using words to express concepts. You, the reader, must tunnel through from your side, hoping to meet exactly in the middle.
And to make sure we actually meet in the middle, Adler gives us rules 5 through 8. These rules are all about interpreting the contents, and we really need to slow down here because this is where the heaviest cognitive lifting happens.
This is the core of it.
Let's take a well-known concept to anchor this. Let's use the Declaration of Independence again since we brought it up earlier. Rule 5 is, come to terms with the author.
And doing this requires distinguishing between words and terms.
Right. A single word can have a dozen meanings, but a term is highly specific.
Exactly. One word can express many terms, and one term can be expressed by many words. A term is established only when the author and the reader are using a word in the exact same unambiguous way.
So if there's a disconnect there.
If the author is using a word in one sense and you are interpreting it in another, you just pass each other in the dark inside that tunnel.
So let's look at the word equal in the Declaration. All men are created equal. If a reader today approaches the word equal with a modern lens, they might assume Jefferson meant equal in wealth, or equal in physical ability, or equal in social standing.
Right, which isn't what he meant at all.
Exactly. If you read the surrounding text, you realize Jefferson is establishing a highly specific term. He means equal in their possession of natural, unalienable rights.
Yes.
If you don't come to terms with his specific definition, the entire political philosophy of the document collapses.
Spotting those vital words, the words that carry the weight of the author's argument, and figuring out their exact definition is the foundation of interpretation.
So that's Rule 5.
Right. Once you've come to terms, you move up from words to sentences. Rule 6. Grasp the author's leading propositions.
So a proposition is essentially a declaration of truth or falsity. It's the author planting a flag.
Yes. Sentences contain propositions. And returning to the Declaration, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed.
That is a massive proposition.
It asserts a very specific relationship between authority and the populace.
And once you identify those key propositions, You move to Rule 7. Construct the arguments.
Right. Arguments are usually found in paragraphs or sometimes strung across multiple paragraphs.
An argument is the logical sequence that ties propositions together to reach a conclusion.
Let's trace the argument in the declaration. It operates like a logical syllogism.
Okay, walk me through it.
Proposition A. People have unalienable rights. Proposition B. Governments exist solely to protect those rights.
Got it.
Proposition C. When a government destroys those rights, the people can alter or abolish it. Proposition D. The King of Great Britain has destroyed those rights.
Therefore,
Therefore, the conclusion. The colonies have the right to abolish his rule.
that is a perfect x-ray of the argument. And finally, Rule 8. Determine which of the author's problems were actually solved and which were left unsolved.
Right. Did they accomplish what they set out to do?
So, returning to you, the listener, how do you actually know if you've successfully grasped the author's proposition? Because it's very easy to stare at a complex sentence, nod along, and trick yourself into thinking you get it.
It is so easy to do that. But Adler offers the ultimate translation test to shatter that illusion.
The translation test.
And it is ruthless. If I ask you to explain what an author means by a particular proposition, and all you can do is repeat the author's exact words back to me with some minor shuffling, you have failed the test.
Oh, that stings.
It does.
I can vividly remember doing that in college seminars. The professor would ask what Kant meant, and I would just quote a sentence from the textbook in a slightly deeper, more serious tone of voice to sound insightful.
We all have. But it proves that you only caught the words, not the thought.
Ow.
Only words passed from the author's mind to yours, like copying and pasting a file. To prove you caught the thought, you must be able to state the proposition in entirely different words.
Entirely different words.
Or even better, you must be able to point to a real-life experience that exemplifies it.
The sources give a fantastic, highly abstract metaphysical example of this.
Oh, the actualization one.
Yes, the proposition is, nothing acts except what is actual.
Right. A reader might repeat that verbatim and feel very wise.
Nothing acts except what is actual. Sounds deep.
But what does it mean?
Exactly. If they actually grasp the term actual as existing and acts as doing something, the translation is brilliantly simple. If something doesn't exist, it can't do anything.
If you can make that translation, you own the thought. The knowledge is yours.
And if you can't,
If you cannot translate it, you are suffering from what the poet Alexander Pope called being a bookful blockhead, ignorantly read.
a bookful blockhead.
You have a head full of quotes and zero understanding.
Bookful blockhead. That perfectly describes the cassette tape culture we talked about at the beginning.
It really does.
And realizing whether you are a blockhead or an analytical reader leads us right into stage 3 of analytical reading, the reader's rights and responsibilities.
This is where it gets interactive.
Up until now, we've just been dissecting, outlining, and translating. We've been entirely deferential to the author. Now we finally earn the right to talk back.
Yes, reading is a conversation, but there is a strict etiquette to it. This is where most modern discourse fails spectacularly.
What's the etiquette?
Rule 9 is the golden rule of intellectual etiquette. You must understand before you judge.
Which means you cannot say, I agree, or I disagree, or even I suspend judgment until you can honestly look in the mirror and say, I understand.
Because if you disagree with a premise you don't actually understand, you aren't arguing with the author. You're just arguing with your own confusion.
That happens on the internet every single day.
Exactly. And conversely, if you agree with something you don't understand, your agreement is intellectually meaningless. It's just blind faith.
It's like reviewing a movie you slept through. You have no authority to critique the plot.
Exactly.
And Rules 10 and 11 build on this etiquette. Don't be disputatious or contentious.
Adler points out a fatal flaw in how we approach debate. Most people think winning the argument is what matters, not learning the truth.
Right.
But winning an argument against a book in the privacy of your own study is an incredibly empty victory. The author isn't there to defend themselves.
They can't talk back.
You can always construct a straw man and win.
Yeah.
But if you do that, you didn't learn the truth. You must distinguish between genuine, provable knowledge and mere personal opinion.
Okay, I agree with the etiquette, but I want to push back on the mechanics of disagreement.
Go for it.
What if I've done all the work? What if I've x-rayed the book, I've translated all the terms, I completely understand the author's syllogisms, and I just flat out think they're wrong?
Okay.
Their logic is sound based on their premises, but their conclusion feels morally or practically wrong to me. Is there a category for that? How do I structure that pushback?
Adler does not allow you to rely on your feelings. He gives us 4 specific, intensely logical ways to disagree. You cannot just say, I hate it, or it feels wrong. You must prove the author fails in one of 4 objective categories.
Okay, what are the 4?
First, the author is uninformed. They lack relevant knowledge that has a direct bearing on their conclusion.
Like someone writing an economic treatise on labor markets, but they are entirely unaware of a massive shift in demographic data that happened a year prior.
Exactly. They are missing a piece of the puzzle. Second, the author is misinformed.
Meaning?
They are asserting facts that are demonstrably empirically false. They are building their argument on a lie or an error.
So their puzzle piece is the wrong shape entirely.
Right. Third is, the author is illogical. They have committed a fallacy in reasoning. Their conclusion does not follow from their own premises.
They might have all the right facts, but they connected them incorrectly.
Precisely. And fourth, which directly addresses your question about a book feeling wrong, even if the logic works. The author's analysis is incomplete.
Incomplete, okay.
They failed to make all necessary distinctions. Or they failed to solve the problem they set out to solve in the beginning.
So even if their facts are right and their logic holds, if they ignored a massive variable that changes the context, I can argue they are incomplete.
Yes, but here is the absolute kicker, the most demanding rule Adler presents.
What is it?
If you cannot logically prove that the author is uninformed, misinformed, illogical, or incomplete, then you actually agree with the book.
Wait, really?
You have no rational basis for disagreement. You might not like what they said, it might upset your worldview, but you cannot intellectually oppose it.
That forces a tremendous amount of intellectual honesty on the reader. It stops you from just writing off an opposing viewpoint because it makes you uncomfortable. You have to prove the mechanical failure in their argument.
Yes, you have to do the work.
Now, we've built this incredibly rigorous forensic tool set for reading expository books, philosophy, science, political treatises. But we can't treat every book like a dense philosophical treatise.
No, you can't.
Let's move to how we adapt these rules. How do these rules flex when we change genres? Let's look at practical books first.
Practical books are books that tell you how to do something, or how something should be done, like an engineering manual, an investing guide, or even how to read a book itself.
Right.
The crucial adaptation here is realizing that a practical book can never actually solve a problem for you. It only gives you rules. Action is the only thing that solves practical problems.
So if I read a book on how to build a birdhouse, and I understand the instructions perfectly, and I agree that the author's methods will yield a great birdhouse, but I never actually pick up a hammer or buy any wood.
You didn't actually agree with the book.
Wow.
If you accept the ends and the means of a practical book, you are logically compelled to act on it. If you don't act, your agreement was an illusion.
Yeah.
You treated a practical book as if it were merely theoretical.
That is a brutal indictment of the entire self-help industry.
It really is.
Millions of people read books on how to be productive or how to be happy, understand them, agree with them, and then change nothing about their lives. Adler would say they didn't actually read the book properly.
They missed the final step.
Action.
Okay, what about imaginative literature? Fiction, poetry, plays. Obviously, we aren't looking for logical propositions and syllogisms in a fantasy novel.
No, the rules completely invert here. The negative rule is, don't read fiction to be taught, read it to be pleased. Beauty is much harder to analyze than truth.
And the positive rule.
The positive rule is, you must become acquainted with the characters and consent to the laws of their world. Don't judge a fantasy novel by the laws of physics. Judge it by the internal consistency of its own magical rules.
Suspension of disbelief. In fiction, the plot is the logical framework. It's the dynamic connection between events, whereas in expository books, the logical argument is the connection.
Exactly.
Okay, what about science and math? A lot of people, myself included, break out in a cold sweat at the sight of a complex equation. We just skip over it and hope the text explains it. Adler urges us to read the great scientific classics, Newton, Darwin, Euclid. And he makes a brilliant demystifying point about mathematics.
Which is?
Math is essentially a language, but it is a language stripped of all emotional connotations and rhetoric.
There are no tricky metaphors in an equation.
Exactly. There is no ambiguity in an isosceles triangle. There is no hidden agenda. Once you master the elementary reading level of mathematical symbols, it is the most perfectly transparent communication possible.
That's a beautiful way to look at it.
He suggests starting with Euclid's elements to experience that pure, unadulterated intellectual satisfaction of a perfectly closed logical loop.
It's pure structural reading. Okay, what about history and current events? We're drowning in news right now more than any human generation before us.
For current events, Adler issues a stark warning. Caveat lector. Let the reader beware.
Beware of what?
With historical or contemporary journalism, we had to aggressively filter out the author's unstated biases. But more importantly, we have to filter out our own. We all possess culturally determined doctrines felt as facts.
Doctrines felt as facts. That's a powerful phrase.
Yeah.
It means things we assume are universal, self-evident truths, but are actually just assumptions of our specific era, geography, or culture.
Right.
It's incredibly hard to see your own filter, which is why reading history is so important. It exposes the filters of the past, which brings us to the absolute summit of the mountain, syntopical reading.
The final level.
What happens when one book isn't enough? What if the listener wants to master an entire subject, like the concept of progress or the history of equality?
This is level 4, the highest, most demanding, and most rewarding level of reading.
How does it work?
Syntopical reading is when you read many books on the same subject and place them in relation to one another. You're effectively constructing an analysis of the subject that might not exist in any single one of the books. You're hosting a dinner party of great minds and forcing them to debate.
But the sources point out a massive, paralyzing paradox here. To read syntopically, you need to know which books to read. But to know which books are relevant to your subject, you must have already read them syntopically. How do you break that infinite loop?
This is where inspectional reading level 2 becomes your savior.
We go back to skimming.
Yes. You must aggressively skim a massive bibliography. You inspect dozens or hundreds of books using that systematic X-ray technique to find the ones that are actually relevant to your specific question.
And once you've culled your massive pile down to the relevant books, there are 5 specific steps to syntopical reading. Let's walk through these using a thought experiment. Let's say I want to do a syntopical read on the concept of freedom.
Okay, good topic.
Step 1 is find the relevant passages.
Yes. Notice the shift here. You aren't reading these books for their own sake anymore. You aren't submitting to the author's overall unity.
The power dynamic flips.
Exactly. The books serve you now. You are hunting for the specific chapters or paragraphs where Thomas Hobbes, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and John Stuart Mill discuss their specific views on freedom.
Okay, I have my passages. Step 2 is create a neutral terminology. This sounds incredibly difficult. If I'm reading Hobbes, freedom means the absence of physical restraint. If I'm reading a modern sociologist, freedom might mean economic mobility. How do I reconcile that?
You have to force them all to speak the same language, your language.
My language.
You establish a neutral term, let's call it self-determination, and you translate Hobbes' physical restraint and the sociologist's economic mobility into how they restrict or enable self-determination. You build a dictionary for this debate.
That is massive cognitive labor. Step 3, frame a set of questions that all the authors can be interpreted as answering. So maybe a question like, does the state enhance or destroy self-determination?
Exactly. And step 4, define the issues. Where do the authors clash?
So Hobbes might say, the state protects it by preventing violence, while an anarchist might say the state destroys it by its very existence.
Right. You map out these intersections of agreement and disagreement.
And finally, step 5, analyze the discussion. You must objectively map out the debate without taking sides. You arrange the questions and the contrasting answers to throw maximum light on the subject.
You aren't trying to prove Hobbes right. You are trying to map the geometry of the entire concept of freedom.
But doing this for just one subject could take years. With millions of books out there, how do I know which ones are actually worth this level of intense analytical or syntopical effort?
Adler introduces the pyramid of books to answer that. Of all the millions of books published, 99% are only good for basic amusement or immediate fleeting information.
The bottom of the pyramid.
You skim them, or you read them superficially, and you never return to them.
The pulp thrillers, the daily news, the light biographies, they don't stretch your mind.
Exactly. Then you have the second tier. Less than 1%, maybe 1 in 10,000 books, are good books. Good books. They stretch your mind. They teach you how to live or explain a complex piece of the world. You should read them analytically once, chew them, digest them, and then put them on the shelf. You've extracted their value.
And the absolute peak of the pyramid.
An infinitesimally small fraction are the great books.
The classics.
These are the books you can never exhaust. Every single time you return to them, no matter how much you have grown intellectually, they will have grown with you. You will see things you missed because your mind has expanded.
They will stretch your mind further.
These are the books that demand and reward syntopical reading.
So, to bring this all together, we started this deep dive talking about that corrupted mental hard drive, the cassette tape culture, that feeling of being a passive catcher, just letting the ball hit us in the face and calling it learning. But Adler has given us an entirely new active operating system.
It really has.
We can be X-ray vision readers. We can dissect the skeleton of a book, translate its terms, argue logically with its author without resorting to emotion, and synthesize entire fields of human knowledge.
And engaging in this process forces a profound humility. We have to realize the vast difference between merely possessing a database of information and genuinely achieving understanding, which reminds me of a brilliant final thought from Montaigne, as quoted in the text.
Yes, Montaigne's 2 types of ignorance.
Montaigne said there is an Abyssinian ignorance that precedes knowledge. It is the simple, innocent ignorance of the child who cannot read their ABCs yet.
They don't know, and they know they don't know.
Exactly. But there is a far more dangerous kind of ignorance. He called it doctoral ignorance, which comes after acquiring knowledge.
Doctoral ignorance.
It is the ignorance of those who have misread many books. Alexander Pope called them bookful blockheads, ignorantly read. The Greeks called them sophomores.
Bookful blockheads. We have so much information at our fingertips. We think we are wise, but we haven't done the active work of understanding. We mistake the cassette tape playing back for our own original thought.
It's the ultimate illusion of competence.
Which leaves you wondering about the future. Adler published this revised edition long before the internet. Today, if I want to read a difficult book, I can just upload a PDF to an AI chatbot and ask it to x-ray the structure, define the terms, and map out the propositions for me in 5 seconds.
Well, absolutely. It's incredibly efficient.
But if the machine does the analytical reading, are we outsourcing our own cognitive heavy lifting? If we bypass the struggle of aided discovery, do we lose the very friction that actually grows our brains?
It's a scary thought.
It's something to deeply consider the next time you ask an algorithm to summarize a complex text for you. So, to you, the listener, here is your call to action.
Look at your own bookshelf today.
Which of those books have you truly read, and which ones have merely passed through your mind as a passive stream of words? Pick one difficult book this week. Don't look up the hard words on the first pass. Find the skeleton, grab a pen, and start pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. Because in a world completely flooded with data, the ability to truly understand is the ultimate superpower.